Hey, what's up, guys? And welcome to the Cheap Stack Show. I don't know if there's necessarily many cheap stacks to deal with this week, but we have a situation where we have a bunch of great wide receivers in great matchups, and we'll dig in right after this. Hey, what's up, guys? Simon Edwards at PumaCom here with Heat Seeker Sports, and you're watching the Week 13 Stack Show. Used to be called the Cheap Stack Show, but lately, these past couple weeks, it's been tougher to find those cheap stacks. The guy that we were hammering in the beginning of the season was CJ Stroud, and now he's like 8K. So it's harder and harder to find those cheap stacks, but we'll try and see what we can see this week. There's a couple cheap guys that are in good matchups or interesting situations that might be worth starting. But Brock Purdy, he's a relatively cheap guy. He's a mid-range guy, but he's looking like he's in a good situation this week. That's going to be the game of the week for me, Philadelphia versus San Francisco, and I'll get into it right after you hit the like button. I'm looking for about 15 to 20 likes, and I'll put out a shorter video later on. And hit the subscribe because you're going to want to get the alerts when those short videos get posted, because they get posted usually within an hour of lock, and that's when I have all my final information that I like to work with and have a more comfortable knowledge of the slate going into lineup lock. So make sure to hit that like button, get me to 15 to 20, and I'll put out that shorter video. Hit subscribe and hit the alerts so you get the alert when that video gets posted. But for now, let's dive into week 13. And I left this up. This is actually where I left my screen off when we got off the last Showdown show on Thursday. And it kind of gives you an illustration. I just wanted to give a quick illustration of, the direction we were headed on that show. And the final lineup that we were messing around with, we had DK Metcalf in the captain. We took a Seattle stand in that build. And this is why you always put in the builds of the underdogs, because this lineup would have won you money, but DK Metcalf was in the captain for the winner, and Geno Smith was in the winner lineup, even though he's been playing like crap recently. He had a huge game out of nowhere, and DK Metcalf was the guy that he honed in on. And you switch up some of these flex guys, and you would have had yourself a pretty good contender for first place in that tournament. My lineup that had Jackson Smith and Jigba as the captain and had Metcalf and Geno in it was in like 400th place in that giant tournament. And I had a huge swing where Smith and Jigba dropped that touchdown. That ended up being a 20-point swing for DK Metcalf because Metcalf ended up catching a touchdown a few plays later. But Jackson Smith and Jigba was a captain guy that I was high on. And if he had caught that touchdown, that would have been a 20-point swing in our direction. And it would have been a big night. But that's how sometimes these showdowns just swing. And, like you can have a huge game or you can have, like kind of a mediocre game. We had a decent showing with those Smith and Jigba lineups. The picks did well. DK Metcalf, I wasn't high on him as a captain, but he ended up coming through. And we did do a couple lineups with him in the captain and used him a decent amount in the flex too. So it ended up being a profitable night. We'll dig in and check out the rest of these matchups here. First, we can look at this Chargers versus Patriots game. And this is one I'm not really into this game. I don't really have too much of an interest in it. There's a few guys that I don't mind taking a look at and considering for this game. And one of those guys is going to be Ramondre Stevenson. I think this is a game where he could get a decent amount of work. You look at his game logs recently, he's had a couple weeks over 20 DraftKings points recently. And he's in a good matchup on top of it. So I don't hate this. I don't hate this matchup at all for Ramondre, and it just puts us in a like one of those affordable running backs that we're going to need in this slate this week, because a lot of these running backs and the guys that you want to use as much as possible are going to be expensive. You can take a look real quick and see what his ownership is looking like. Ramondre's ownership is looking at around 12-13%. So it's a kind of a middling ownership, which is good. So I don't mind Ramondre, but other than that, like this game, I'm kind of staying away from. There is one other guy that I'm interested in, and that is Guyton, Jalen Guyton, because he's cheap. And I'm going to be looking for these receivers and running backs that are cheap this week to kind of get in the studs. Jalen Guyton didn't do anything last week, but like they're running out of guys to throw to. I think Quentin Johnson is questionable this week. Let's take a look at Quentin Johnson real quick. It looks like he's not questionable. He was a full participant on Wednesday, but he has not been delivering this year, and you can see it in his game log. 1.7 DraftKings points in a game where they really needed him to step up against Baltimore. 4.1 against Green Bay, same situation. They needed him to step up. The guy, he's just a bust at this point. But that opens the door for Jalen Guyton. Guyton came back from I believe, an ACL injury a couple weeks ago, and he got 14 points in week 10. He had 6 targets that week. He had 5 targets last week against Baltimore, tougher pass defense, and he didn't do anything with them. But if we throw him in this matchup against New England has been vulnerable to wideouts. They're allowing 20.6 DraftKings points a game to the wideout position. I'm doing these numbers from week 5 on. I lop out the first 4 weeks of the season because there's a lot of adjustment that gets done with these teams in the first 4 weeks of the season. So I tend to take those weeks out to get a real better idea of what these defenses are all about. And it looks like New England is allowing those points to the wideout position. Keenan Allen is probably going to be the guy that they're honing in on this week. Otherwise, Keenan Allen would be in an interesting situation. But I think Keenan Allen is the guy that New England's going to focus on. I think that's going to leave a lot of opportunity for Guyton against a defense that hasn't been that great against wideouts. And they got no one else to throw to, like I said. So Jalen Guyton at 3,300 is going to be interesting this week. Let's check and see Let's see. Josh Palmer is still on injured reserve. He hasn't ruled him out from playing this week, but he's coming off of injured reserve. If he comes back, Palmer might be interesting. But I think that I like Guyton a decent amount this week. Guyton's been back a few weeks from that injury. Usually takes these receivers a few weeks to get accustomed to the speed of the game again. And I wouldn't be surprised if Guyton has a decent game this week. So he's really the only guy, in addition to Ramondre, that I'd be interested in this week. We're looking at a game with a low total, 40.5 DraftKings points, or 40.5 point total. Chargers are 5.5 point favorites, and never trust the Chargers as favorites. And that's about all I got for that game. Otherwise, it's kind of a mediocre game. Not really interested there. Detroit, New Orleans. This is another game I'm not entirely interested in, but I do like the situation for Taysom Hill this week. Taysom Hill, it looks like the Saints are missing Rashid Shaheed. Chris Olave is questionable. I think he's in concussion protocol still. Let's see. Listed as questionable contest against the Doesn't say specifically, but it looks like he put in a full practice on Friday, but he's coming off of a concussion protocol, so not really sure what's going on with Olave just yet. Michael Thomas is on IR. So they basically, all their weapons in the passing game are MIA, which opens the door for Taysom Hill. He's got a decent salary at 5,200. This is like these are the perfect games for Taysom Hill when they're up against, like a team like Detroit, where they're going to have to put up offense, and all their offensive players are injured, except for basically Kamara and Taysom Hill. And I could totally see this being a Taysom game. This could be one of those weeks where we see him score, 20 plus points like he did against Chicago and Indy just a few weeks ago. And I don't know if a lot of people are going to be on him. Let's see what his ownership is this week. Taysom is looking at a 4% ownership projection. So Taysom Hill should be interesting this week. If people start talking too much about him, I don't know what people are saying in the DFS industry about him. I haven't looked at anyone else's content. So Taysom Hill, is, to me, he's interesting. I would consider having him in your lineups this week. I just think that Detroit is a team that they're going to need to put up points against, and that puts Taysom Hill in a good spot. If we look at Alvin Kamara, he's got a tough defense that he's going up against. Detroit is only allowing 17.2 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. So that puts Kamara in a tough spot. They're only giving up 10 points a game to the tight end position, but I do lean Taysom in that matchup a little bit more than Kamara. I think that Taysom would be in a better situation to outdo his salary. As far as other guys, Rashid Shaheed, this would have been a great matchup for Rashid Shaheed. The slot position, Detroit is giving up 24.5 DraftKings points to the slot. If Olave ends up playing, that makes him interesting because he runs 40% of his routes in the slot. But like I said, I think I'd be more on Taysom than anyone else in this game. It just seems like the perfect setup for him. On the Detroit side, Laporta has a great matchup. Saints are giving up 15.5 DraftKings points a game to the tight end position. The running backs are in a decent spot, with New Orleans giving up 20 DraftKings points a game to the running backs, and I would imagine that they would be used a lot in a game like this. Detroit are 4.5 points favorites, and it's a 46.5 point total. But I think that the running backs would be used a decent amount in a game like this, especially if New Orleans is going to be missing all those weapons. So keep them in your player pool this week. Other than that, Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's always in play. The guy just crushes every week. He's one of the high-priced guys that you want to consider this week. He probably has the worst matchup out of the high-priced guys, so I'm not all in on him by any means, but I'll definitely sprinkle him in because Saints are allowing only 15 DraftKings points a game to the slot and only 7 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. So most of the action is funneling to the tight end position when it comes to the points that New Orleans are allowing. So tight end is the main interest on the Detroit side there, but not interested in stacking this game. Let's look at Atlanta versus the Jets. This is another game not really interested in stacking. Atlanta's got a tough defense that they're facing. The only player of interest would be Bijan, and even that is pretty thin, the way that you can't trust the head coach over there. Arthur Smith has been, just making just these ridiculous decisions with these highly drafted playmakers, and you can't really trust him. But Jets are giving up 26.5 DraftKings points a game to the running back position, which is fantastic for the running back matchup. But like I said, it's a matter of how much trust you want to put in Arthur Smith to use him and to take advantage of that. On the Jets side, whoever the quarterback is, who's the quarterback for the Jets this week? Tim Boyle looks like he's going to get another shot at it. Yeah, he's confirmed as the quarterback this week. So Tim Boyle is set up with a nice matchup against these Atlanta Falcons. What did Boyle do last week? He ended up with only 9 DraftKings points last week. Problem with the Jets is not the quarterback position necessarily, although they are in a bad spot with the quarterback position. Zach Wilson has been a disaster, and Aaron Rodgers got taken out in week 1, and now they're down to Tim Boyle. But the problem with the Jets is the offensive line. And if you watch Rodgers play that one series in week 1, he was scrambling on every play, and one of those scrambles led to his Achilles tearing, rupturing. With Zach Wilson, the guy was running for his life on every play. And now you got Tim Boyle. Like, I don't know what we think that Tim Boyle can come in here and look any better than Zach Wilson, but, crazier things have happened. If you wanted to go cheap stack with Tim Boyle, he's 4,800. He's got the type of matchup that you want, with Atlanta giving up 20 DraftKings points again to the game to the quarterback position. If I was stacking him, I'd stack him with Wilson. Wilson's running enough of his routes from the slot to be worthwhile. He's running 30% of his routes from the slot, and the Falcons are giving up 22 DraftKings points a game to slot receivers. They're also giving up 8 DraftKings points a game to wideouts, which is horrible for wideouts. It's a bad matchup for the wideouts on the Jets, but Garrett Wilson runs a decent amount of his routes in the slot to make him interesting. Other than that, looks like a bunch of scrubs for wide receivers on the Jets. Conklin could be interesting this week because the Falcons are giving up 14 DraftKings points a game to the tight end position. Let's see how Conklin did last week with the Boyle quarterback situation. Last week, Conklin had 5 targets. He only caught 4 of them for 33 yards last week, but that's not to say that he couldn't perform better in the matchup this week, especially with the amount of points that those Falcons are giving up to the tight end position. So Conklin at 3K is a cheap option at tight end, and we're looking for cheap options this week. So keep Conklin in your player pool this week. So let's see. Moving on to the next game here. We got Arizona versus Pittsburgh. This is another game, just a bad, sloppy game. Nothing too interesting here, except on the Pittsburgh side. But it's how much trust you want to put in Kenny Pickett. They got rid of Matt Canada at least. But the running backs have the best setup, with Arizona giving up 27 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. They're also giving up 18 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. It's being played in Pittsburgh. They got that going for them. And, maybe not such a bad setup for Pickett. It's just how much trust you want to put in them. Like, the slot position is getting 21.6 DraftKings points from the Arizona defense. And, normally Deontay Johnson is the slot guy, but he's been running most of his routes outside this season. So it's tough to get on Deontay, but I think if I was stacking this game, I would probably lean Pickett to one of those running backs and Deontay. Or maybe you could just do one of those running backs and Deontay and just hope that Arizona is able to do something on the other side, the slot position on Arizona. The Steelers are giving up 22 DraftKings points a game to the slot. That's really the only matchup of note that I see. Greg Dortch, I think, would be the guy there, or Rondale Moore. Greg Dortch is super cheap this year. Let's see, where is he? Dortch is 3,700. And last week he got 9 targets. He got 8 targets the week before that. So he's been getting the targets. Dortch should be on your radar this week. Other than that, Rondale Moore, what's he done since Kyler's been back? 3 targets last week, 1 target the week before that. So not much happening for Rondale Moore. He did get that 148-yard touchdown, like one of the first series in the game, and everyone who faded Rondale that week was basically sweating it the entire rest of the game. He didn't get a single other target the rest of that game, though, just to show you how reliable that guy is. So not really on Rondale myself, but he's 3,400, and he's got the good matchup in the slot versus that Pittsburgh defense. So a few interesting plays there as far as the total. I see a 41.5 point total with Pittsburgh as 5.5 point favorites at home. So, take that for what it's worth. The running backs on Pittsburgh definitely have a good matchup. It's just a matter of which one you want to go with, because they have both been used recently. We had 13 rush attempts from Jaylen Warren the week that he got announced as the starting running back. He had 3 targets on top of that, only generated 8 Draftkings points against Cincinnati. You look at Najee Harris last week. He did the opposite, 15 attempts, 99 yards, a touchdown in the receiving, I believe, and put up 15, almost 16 Draftkings points. So Najee had a big week. Maybe they announced Warren the starter because they wanted to get Najee Harris going. Maybe it was a psychological thing, but if you want to use one of those guys, they are cheap running back options, and we are looking for cheap running back options. So Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris are interesting this week in this matchup. Let's move on to Indianapolis versus Tennessee. Now, Zach Moss is looking like chalk this week. Let's look at his matchup. If you look at his matchup, Indy is actually giving up a decent amount or Tennessee is giving up a decent amount of Draftkings points a game to the running back position. Maybe there's a perception from earlier in the season that Tennessee had a decent running defense. I know as far as a DVOA perspective, if you take the entire season into account, Tennessee is up there like one of the top run defenses. But if you look from week 5 on, they are giving up 22.5 Draftkings points a game to the running back position. So that is interesting for Zach Moss. Let's see who they've faced. All right, so week 5 on, they faced Zach Moss, scored 36.5 Draftkings points against them in week 5. Nobody on the Ravens did anything against them in week 6. And week 8, I'm looking at Bijan, who only scored 12 Draftkings points against them. Let's see if we can get some more games in here. Let's see if we go beyond week 6. Try to find another game here. Week 6 was the Baltimore Ravens. Week 8 went over the week 8 one. So yeah, I don't have any others in my my game log here, but Zach Moss, I thought he was going to be a fade, but now it's looking like he has a really decent matchup. So 4,600 for Zach Moss in this matchup is actually pretty good. So maybe not such bad chalk after all. I'm going to keep him in my player pool after seeing that. On the rest of the team, the matchups that look the most interesting are the slot position for Indy. That's Josh Downs. We haven't heard that name in a few weeks. Josh Downs runs 83% of his routes from the slot, and that is where Tennessee is giving up 20 Draftkings points a game. So Josh Downs is firmly in play this week. On the Tennessee side, Derrick Henry has a nice matchup with Indy giving up 26 Draftkings points a game to the running back position, setting up Derrick Henry for a nice game. And Chigakonkwo, who has been MIA all season, actually has a decent matchup this week with Indy giving up 15 Draftkings points a game to the tight end position. I said it a few weeks ago. I'm looking for that spot with Will Levis playing at home against a easy defense, like a good pass-friendly defense. We don't get that this week because the Colts are only allowing 12 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. I wish it was going to be a better matchup because this was going to be the perfect spot to use Will Levis when everybody has wrote him off basically. But like this looks like another week where he might struggle. So I'm going to pass on the Will Levis stack this week, and maybe we'll get him at home in an easier matchup soon. Miami at Washington is another interesting game. This is one that should be high-powered on both sides because the total of this game is the highest total on the slate that I'm seeing at 49.5 DraftKings points. Looking at Miami as 9.5 point favorites, which means Howell will be throwing a lot. Unfortunately for Howell, Miami has only been giving up 14 DraftKings points a game since week 5, which is not a good matchup for Howell. And the running backs, Miami has only been allowing 13.9 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. So that is a bad matchup for those Washington running backs. The matchup that Washington has that favors them is the slot, where Miami is giving up 20.8 DraftKings points a game. And if we're looking at the slot, that is Curtis Samuel, who runs 70% of his routes in the slot, and Jahan Dotson, who runs 42% of his routes in the slot. Those guys are both interesting if you're looking for a run back and you want to stack Miami. Washington is giving up 24 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position, and that puts our guy Tua in play. Tua has had an up and down last few weeks, up and down season, and Tua does really poorly versus the teams that generate pressure, like the Jets last week. That's why we faded him in the lineups for the Black Friday showdown. We faded Tua in that game, and Tua against pressure predictably did not perform. If you look at him versus Vegas is able to generate pressure, and he put up 22.6 DraftKings points. So he bucked the trend there. But against Kansas City, another team that generates pressure, 12 DraftKings points. So, he's able to go against teams that don't generate pressure, and Washington is one of those teams. So Tua is in a good spot this week, and Washington just fired their defensive coordinator. So, just kind of shows what Washington has been up to as a defense so far this season. That means Ron Rivera will be calling the defensive plays probably this week. Tyreek Hill probably has one of the best matchups on the slate this week. Problem with Tyreek Hill is his wrist was all messed up last week. And if you watch the Hard Knocks episode, he could barely move his wrist. He could only catch the ball up against his body. I don't know what was going on with his wrist. He's not on the injury report this week, but that does raise concern. And it gives us a reason if we want to go on the Waddle side. But Washington is giving up the most DraftKings points a game to wideouts. They're giving up 23 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. And they are giving up 14 points a game to the slot, but that doesn't really interest us with Miami. They are giving up 18.6 DraftKings points from the slot. Washington is. I don't know if I said slot prior to that, but I meant tight end. They're giving up 14.2 DraftKings points again to tight end. But like with Miami, we don't have a tight end that we're really interested in. But the slot, that 18.6 points a game, Tyreek runs a decent amount of his routes in the slot. He's 37% from the slot. So he does have a good matchup there. Good matchup all around. But if you were looking for an excuse to fade Tyreek or to lower your exposure to him, maybe that injury is a little bit more than they're leading on. Jalen Waddle would be a good pivot in that situation. Jalen Waddle last week had a good game. He had 22 and a half DraftKings points against the Jets. And Jalen Waddle was the missing piece in that Black Friday showdown lineup that I put together. It was a Garrett Wilson for Jalen Waddle swap would have won the tournament. And I was that 1v1 away from winning the tournament. And if I built more lineups, I only built like 3 or 4. I built them all in my car too. So I really did not get to put my focus into building lineups that week. But Jalen Waddle would have been easy swap for Garrett Wilson because I did not like putting 2 Jets in that lineup. And I really like the Jets D. So they were the main Jet that I wanted in my lineups in that game. But it didn't work out. But Jalen Waddle, big game last week. He's had a few sprinkled in here, and he is interesting this week against the Washington Commanders. So let's see what the running back situation. Running back also has a good matchup. So if you wanted to fade the passing game and go towards the running game, Mostert has a good matchup. A-Chain is back this week. Don't know how much work he's going to get. Let's see. Made it official a few hours after McDaniel announced he's going to be ready. Keep an eye on this A-Chain news. Looks like he's going to be back this week, but we want to get an idea of how much work he's going to get because Wilson had a decent game last week. Wilson ended up putting up, only 10 DraftKings points, but he had 11 carries for 56 yards, and he had 3 targets on top of it. And Wilson was one of the ones who made it in that optimal showdown lineup last week. Mostert was also in that lineup. He ended up getting 21 and a half DraftKings points. He had 20 attempts for 94 yards and 1 target, and 2 touchdowns. The thing with Mostert, though, is they've been talking about how they want to reduce his workload. So that was why I liked Jeff Wilson a lot last week. And, that is why I would like A-Chain this week. And maybe people are off of A-Chain after he only played 1 snap or just like 1 series in his last game where he came back. I'm looking at his ownership right now, and I see a projection of, less than 1%, which I don't really buy. But if you wanted to pivot off of Tyreek, you got options. You got Waddle, you got A-Chain, and you got Mostert. So you got plenty of options there if you want to pivot off of Tyreek and hope that those points find their way to one of these other guys or maybe a couple of them. So keep those guys in your player pool. Tua stacks are in play this week, of course. Now, on the other side, Sam Howell is leading the league in passing yards, and he's done a great job from a fantasy perspective. You can see the last 5 games all over 20 DraftKings points with a couple monster games in there with 35 DraftKings points against Philly and 28 DraftKings points against Seattle. Other than that, you see a few other 20 DraftKings point weeks. And I think that Howell is the type of guy that you don't need to stack him. You don't need to stack Howell. But this week, if you wanted to use Howell, I do like Samuel's matchup. So if we put Samuel in there, and then we let's put in Tyreek, and let's give a running back 2 on that side. If I was stacking this game, it probably looks something similar to this. Let's see if we can get A.J. Brown in this lineup too. I'm just jumping ahead here. If we put A.J. Brown, that leaves us with a $3,600 per guy salary. If we go lower in our, let's say we use the Chargers just suck, so let's put in those Patriots as a defense there, and Let's get cheap with Dortch maybe as our flex. That leaves us with 4,100 per guy. If we wanted to go cheap and go with Zach Moss, who I now like after setting up the show, not liking him. So I get Zach Moss in there and tight end. Let's see, Higbee, Logan Thomas. If you wanted to double stack Howell, that's an option. Let's see what the tight end is doing versus. Yeah, they don't have the best setup, but they don't have a bad one either. But probably not a guy that I want to go to. Pitts has a decent setup. Where is his partner in crime? Here we go. Jonnu Smith. How many targets did Jonnu get last week? None. 2 the week before that, and 6 in Minnesota. So Jonnu's all over the place. What has Pitts been doing? Pitts has been getting 2, 5, 5, 5. So he didn't really get much last week either. So that isn't an indictment on Jonnu necessarily. If we're looking for other potential tight ends this week, there's Conklin. So Conklin at 3K, you can get him in this lineup. That leaves us with a little bit more salary to play around with this flex position if we wanted to. 4,400. And that leaves us with Freiermuth, not a whole bunch of options. If we wanted to get to Taysom in that flex position, let's say we want to do 2 tight ends. I don't mind 2 tight ends this week, like just the way that the slate is lining up. If you wanted to get rid of Tyreek and put Waddle in there, that's a way to go. If we put Waddle in there and maybe let's see, let's swap out Hill for Kittle. We got Brown in there, and that would give us 2 sides of that game. And Kittle is in a matchup we'll talk about in a little bit. First, hit that like button, get me to 20 likes, and hit the subscribe button. I want to get to 300 subscribers by the end of the season. That's my goal. We're at 200 right now, so just need 100 left, and we got plenty of time. I'm throwing the playoffs in that too by the end of the season, so we got the playoffs to get there too, and we're going to be doing plenty of best ball playoff content. That's my favorite game to play, and I've had probably one of my best games beyond Showdown that I have the most success in. So looking forward to those playoffs starting. We'll do some shows to project those playoffs in a few weeks here, but this is kind of a situation that we're looking at here. You can take out the Patriots D and plug in, like another option if you wanted to. I don't hate the Panthers D either, but this is a direction of a build. Jumped the gun a little bit there because I saw that matchup that I wanted to see what I could do with. So let's go on to Denver and Houston. Denver and Houston, we are looking at a second highest point total on the slate. We're looking at a 47.5 point total with Houston as 3.5 point favorites. Houston does not have a lot of good matchups this week, except for the running back position. Denver's giving up 22 DraftKings points a game to the running back position, and they're giving up 17 DraftKings points a game to the tight end position. So our guy Schultz is out, which sucks. And that's going to be looking at the backup tight end for Houston. It looks like Brevin Jordan is the guy. Brevin Jordan's cheap, at least. He's 2,500. Hasn't really done much this year, but he's in about as good a spot as you can get with the tight end position. And he's been one of those guys that's been known, I think he's had a little bit of a reputation as a pass catching tight end. So he's interesting. The running backs on the Houston side are interesting too. On Denver, best matchup goes to the tight end, and I don't like the Denver tight ends, so that leaves Denver kind of dry. Could be a game where Russ Wilson is dink and dunking. Maybe he's throwing to Jerry Jeudy or Mims, or trying to generate explosive plays behind the line of scrimmage. Javonte Williams would be interesting in that situation, but I don't like those setups for any of those guys. So 47.5 seems high for this game. Sutton does have a good DVOA matchup, and Mims also has a good DVOA matchup, but the DraftKings points allowed per game for wideouts isn't great. They're allowing Houston's allowing 14 DraftKings points a game to the wideouts, but this game does not pop for me. It's a close total, a close spread on a high total, which seemingly would make it a good game to target. Let's see what the ownership's like on it. You're looking at the quarterback. I mean, Russ Wilson has a 16% ownership projection. I don't know how much I'm buying that. Let me get a different set of ownerships here. Yeah, Russ Wilson, 16% owned. I mean, Denver's been playing well lately, and we've been on top of that the entire season. That's why we've been taking out like all the weeks from week 5 on, where Denver allowed 70 DraftKings or 70 points to the Dolphins in week 4. Ever since then, they've been a completely different team, and anyone who is not taking out those first few weeks is not getting an accurate read on the team there. So let's take a look at some of these projections for ownership from a different source and see where Russ is at. Russ Wilson, 15% and 13%. So yeah, this is a really weird week. I'm not high on Russ this week. Not in this matchup. I mean, Houston's given up 18 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position, and Russ has been having a good year. Let's take a look at Russ real quick. He is 17. Like, he hasn't scored over 20 DraftKings points since week 4, but he has had a 30-point upside there. So he's not he's not horrible, but I mean, 5,700 is the salary. Let's take a look at what we can get in that range. If we're looking at 5,700, we got not much underneath him. Let's see who would have a good matchup. Tua's got a good matchup. Purdy has a good matchup. Derek Carr has a good matchup, but I'm not interested in that game. Pittsburgh has a good matchup. Pickett, his cost is 5,100. I'd probably go Pickett over Russ Wilson. And Joe Flacco has a good matchup. Bryce Young has a good matchup, and the Jets guy has a good matchup. So I can see why people are leaning on Russ as the best cheap option, but yeah, I'm not there personally. I don't think that the setup is necessarily there for him, but I can understand why people are there. So let's go to Carolina at Tampa Bay. Mayfield versus Young. This should be a low-scoring game. Looking at a 36.5-point total with Tampa Bay as 5.5-point favorites. Rachaad White has the best matchup, with the Carolina giving up 27.5 DraftKings points a game to that running back position. Bryce Young, as I just said, has a great setup. They are getting 22.5 DraftKings points a game from the Tampa Bay defense. So, new head coach, basically. They fired Frank Reich. So, yeah, Bryce Young, horrible decision by the Carolina Panthers to fire Frank Reich. I mean, Frank Reich was not on board with Bryce Young, drafting Bryce Young. Owner made a bad decision to pressure them into Bryce Young. Uh, Words coming out that Reich wanted Stroud, and this owner is just a bonehead in general. He's made all sorts of bad decisions, and it's they just keep digging themselves into more and more of a hole. But now maybe it sparks something with the offense, and Bryce Young is able to somehow have a decent game this week. I doubt it, but if you're looking for a narrative, there's one that you could use. And Young is 4,900, so he's super cheap, and he's got a great matchup against Tampa Bay's defense, and they're giving up 22.5 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. The slot is a perfect setup for Thielen because Tampa Bay is giving up 32.5 points, DraftKings points a game to the slot position, and they're giving up 15.5 points a game to the tight end. But if I was starting Bryce, let's see what we can do with a Bryce Young lineup. Let's get rid of Samuel. Let's get rid of those guys. Let's get rid of A-Chain. And let's just clear it out completely. All right, so Bryce Young. If you wanted to go Bryce Young and put him with Thielen, that's a start to this stack. And I don't want to put too many players from this game in here, but we would have it run back with Rachaad White. Now, you could probably plug in like Mike Evans too, but he's 7,700, and we have better matchups on the slate that we want to get to. And that's why we're using Bryce Young as a salary saver, along with Thielen, who's come down in price. He's only 6,600 now, which is great for us, especially after he had 1.2 DraftKings points last week. I don't know how he only had 1 or 3 targets last week, but that's what he had against Tennessee, which should have been an easy matchup for him. But Thielen, if you want to stack him with Bryce Young, I think he's in a good matchup. And for the rest of the lineup, let's go with Hill. Let's go with Brown. Get that game stacked with Kittle. Let's put Kittle in there. For defense, we've seen the Patriots already. Yeah, this is already not even working out, so it's not even worth really putting them in there unless you can get the stack that you want. So if you want to put Taysom in there instead, we still can't get to a decent stack. You'd still have to take out. Well, let's say we don't even want to stack him. Let's just say that we want to put just Bryce in there. Let's put Dortch. We put Dortch in there, and then we got Rachaad White. Let's just put Zach Moss. And he's a free square this week. That leaves us with 4,500 in the flex. That leaves us with options like Freiermuth, Njoku, just tight ends there. Let's get rid of Dortch. Let's put Guyton in there. Put Guyton in there. Gives us 4,900 to play with. Let's see if that improves our options a little bit here. If we had 4,900, that leaves us with options like Drake London at least, George Pickens, Jerry Jeudy, Jeff Wilson. So a lot better. Dotson. You got a lot better options. You could put Dotson as your run back from Tyreek in there. So that sets up perfectly. What's Curtis Samuel? Curtis Samuel, you can use him too, and that gives you 800 left to upgrade. Can we get to Kittle? No, we're 200 short on Kittle. But what if we put Kittle in and swap out the Patriots? If we wanted to put Kittle in there, let's swap out Moss. Let's find another cheap running back. Moss is the best value on the slate. Jeff Wilson is the same price as him. Gibson, Gibson could be an option. That'll give you another guy to run back. Let's say instead of Samuel, let's put in Gibson. And then we got Kittle, and then we can put in, let's stick with the Patriots D. And 4K for a flex. So that leaves you with like a decent spot. You can put in like a guy like Dortch or someone like that. Then you got like a couple cheap guys in there, but at least, it gives you some options, and it gives you a lot of good guys and good matchups that you can throw in there. So don't hate Guyton versus the Patriots either. Sometimes I think that playing a guy against your defense is kind of like, overthinking. So there's a few options there if you wanted to use the Bryce Young stack, but I personally not interested in Bryce Young. If we go to the San Francisco versus Philly game, this is my favorite game of the week. Love Hurts. I love Purdy. Purdy especially at 6,100. He's my top quarterback, and he's relatively cheap. I like stacking him with Kittle. I like running it back with Brown. This is how I like starting my lineups this week. Let's see what their ownerships are. Purdy is looking at, oh God, he's a 17% ownership, serious, and 18% for the other way. So yeah, maybe Purdy's not the best way to go, but yeah, that game's going to be hard to get away from. But from a quarterback perspective, I think you can get away from it, like with some of those cheaper options. That explains why Russ maybe is so popular. But I mean, why jump from chalky Brock Purdy to chalky Russ Wilson? It doesn't make sense. Pickett, I think, makes more sense than Russ. Let's mess around with that a little bit. Let's see. If we wanted to go Pickett as our guy, and let's give him Pickens as a cheap stacking partner. How much is Deontay? He's only 5K. He's only 200 more. He's got the better matchup. But you got to figure that Arizona, what are they giving up to they're giving up 15.6 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. I don't know. If you want to go this direction, maybe you put in Najee or Warren. Let's put in Warren. I mean, this way you can get Dortch in there too. Like Dortch is going to be, like a popular play, but this way we're using him as a run back instead. And let's get Tyreek in there. Should be saving enough money to be able to get him in. Patriots D is this with 4K. Let's go Moss. 4,800. Does that get us to Najee? No, it doesn't. It's $400 short. So it's gonna be tight to get the get lineups going this week. At least from what I'm seeing, like just trying to jam in these guys who I like all their matchups. I like AJ Brown's matchup. I like Tyreek's matchup. It's hard to get both those guys in this week, even with using these shitty, cheap quarterbacks and just hoping for like a cheap stack to go off and having Zach Moss as that salary relief. So it's really, I may be missing something. If I'm missing something, leave it in the comment section. I'm going to be doing a little bit more digging into some of these value plays later on. But right now, this is what I'm seeing. I've been focused primarily on showdowns up until this point in the week. So, I'm just trying to figure out, like the popular builds or just general builds to go. Let's build an optimal, see where it goes. All right, so the optimal lineup this week is going to be Russ Wilson. What the optimizers are telling us is optimal. It's going to be White, and Zach Moss. Let's see. Looking at Guyton. God, is Guyton going to be high owned? Guyton, Pickens, and Tyreek. Pickens and Tyreek. And then for tight end, they like Otten and they go McCaffrey. So, I mean, that gives you an idea of what the optimizer likes this week. It's not really a lot of these guys are guys that I've been talking about throughout the show. White, I like. I do like Moss. I didn't think I was going to like him, but I like Moss. Guyton, I like Pickens. Maybe lean Deontay over Pickens, actually. But Tyreek, I like, obviously. And McCaffrey, I like McCaffrey, but I kind of like, going Kittle more. And I kind of like paying down for running backs. I think, what's McCaffrey's ownership going to be? If we look at McCaffrey's ownership, we're looking at a 23.5% ownership. So I'm not really that high on McCaffrey. Obviously, he's a guy that's going to go off this week. Look at all these 20 plus DraftKings points a week, including a bunch of like high 20s in there. Like McCaffrey is about as solid as you can get. And every week you're just like sweating if you fade him. But 9,000 with high price guys like Tyreek in there and AJ Brown, who I like, who these guys are not getting in. I think I kind of like going AJ Brown as my other expensive guy instead of McCaffrey this week. That's kind of a direction that I want to go. That's forcing me to pay down like in my running back position. But, like with Zach, what's his face? Zach Moss there, it makes it a little easy. So, yeah, if we clear that out, we go the direction that I was just looking at with Purdy. Tyreek and Brown. And then we have Zach Moss as our salary relief there. We want to put Kittle in there as a stacking partner for Purdy. It really leaves you in a tight spot. We got to get our second running back in here now just to see what that's going to leave us with. I like one of these Pittsburgh guys. Let's go with Najee. And for defense, let's go with the Patriots D. This is 3,500 for flex spots. If we go Guyton, that leaves us with 3,800. I mean, that's Dortch territory, so it's not horrible. But again, it's like there's not a lot of salary relief in this slate, so we're going to be looking for salary relief. So if we look at this final game here, Cleveland versus the Rams, maybe we can find something in here. Now, Cleveland versus the Rams, the Cleveland quarterback, Joe Flacco, has a great matchup. 4,600 is how much he costs. let's see. The total in that game is 39.5. The Rams are capable of putting up points. Cleveland's defense has allowed a lot of points in a bunch of games. And from a DraftKings perspective, they're allowing 21 DraftKings points game to the running back position, 11.5 to the wide outs, and 17 to the slot receivers, all of which are middling and all of which favor some of the key guys on the Rams. Kylan Williams has been a great running back this season. And in the slot, you got Cooper Kupp, and even Puka is taking 33% of his routes in the slot. So, it's capable. LA's capable of putting up points. If you wanted to do a stack with Joe Flacco, the wideouts have the best opportunity. They have the best matchup, and that would be mainly Amari Cooper. I'm guessing that Flacco will lean on Cooper, a dependable veteran, as opposed to Cedric Tillman. And he might even like Elijah Moore a bit. And Moore is running, he's running 49% of his routes in the slot, but the Rams have been good against slot receivers. But Njoku also has a good matchup, and that's another spot where Flacco might lean. Let's start messing around with this. So I'm going to get Njoku in there, and let's get Cooper in there. If Cooper ends up being too much, then we'll flip it to Elijah Moore. So I don't even think we necessarily need a run back. But if we were going to do a run back, I don't want to waste $7K on run back in this game. And all those guys are $7K. So I probably would not do a run back in this game if I'm looking for salary relief to get in the studs in these other games. So let's go with Tyreek and let's go with Brown. Let's get those guys in there. We still don't have a running back. So let's get Moss in there. And let's get that New England D in there. Like, that's kind of been our go-to defense in this one. Leaves us with $5K per guy left. If we're looking at running backs, I did see a few guys in that range. If we wanted to use Najee, that leaves us with $5K left. We don't even have to go that low, though. If we wanted to, we could use guys like Stevenson. If we want to use Stevenson, that puts us in a good spot. That puts us in 4,200 left over. And we could let's put in Curtis Samuel. He's an option. Let's put in Dortch. If we put in Dortch, well, Samuel would be a good correlation with Tyreek. So, but if we put in Dortch, that gives us 500 extra to play with if we wanted to take out maybe Stevenson. That leaves us with with White as an option, who we like, and Stevenson as another option. Let's put Stevenson back in there, and let's swap out him, Zach Moss. Rondale, I thought that would give us a Rachaad White. I thought they give us Rachaad White. It does not. So if you wanted to swap out Moss, yeah. Looks like we can't really do that. So Moss it is. But I mean, there's a direction. Like, that's the miracle of Joe Flacco coming back at a 4,600 salary, which we've seen in the past. These veteran quarterbacks have the potential to do something like that, to come in against the Rams, who are perfectly capable of putting up points against Cleveland. We're looking at this total. The total is really low at 40 points, 39.5 points. But if Flacco is able to come in here in a good matchup where the Rams are giving up 19 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position, they're giving up 18.5 points a game, DraftKings points a game to wideouts, and they're giving up 14 DraftKings points a game to tight ends. So that sets up all our guys. You know what? Let me try something here. If we wanted to put in Taysom, I still need a San Francisco guy, though, for that run back of Brown. So let's look at Kittle. If we wanted to get Kittle in, I'd need 2K. Let's see, Elijah Moore. If we put in Elijah Moore instead of Cooper, that gives us a pretty decent setup. But Elijah Moore does not have a good matchup in the slot, but it's an option. If we say that Flacco is leaning more on Elijah Moore is a pivot off of guys like Dortch, who's going to be popular this week. If Flacco is leaning on guys like Moore and Njoku, who, like these quarterbacks are looking for safety blankets, and usually it's the guys who run the short routes in the middle, and that's Njoku, and that is Elijah Moore. That sets us up with those guys. We got Moss and Stevenson, who both have good matchups as our running backs. We got, Tyreek, and we don't have a run back for Tyreek. We got Brown and Kittle in there as our representation for that high scoring game. And we got the Patriots D in there. So this is a interesting direction. I mean, this is why we like cheap stacks, because it opens up the space to put in other guys in good matchups. But this is definitely a reach here with a Flacco stack. But like I said, a quarterback who's a veteran, he's coming in against a team that's capable of putting up points in the Rams. This is an afternoon game. They're playing in a dome. It has a lot of things going for it. And I mean, it has potential because Cleveland hasn't really been able to get a run game going. And the Rams defense is solid against the run. They're only giving up 19 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. It's just an interesting overall game. Let's see what they're doing as far as a DVOA perspective. The Rams are probably about middling DVOA to good. Yeah, I mean the Rams are not a bad matchup for the running back on the Cleveland side, but if things worked out where the Rams were putting up a good amount of points at home in a dome against Cleveland, which has given up points in the past, that sets up Flacco, potentially Moore, and Njoku if you wanted to run a double stack there. Obviously, you could easily pivot out of either one of these guys and make it a single stack. I don't want to put a Rams run back, even though it would work great with this lineup, just because they're too expensive. They're all 7K, and I don't want to waste 7K on a Ram with all the other stuff that I want to do in this lineup. But there's some options for this week, and make sure to hit that like button, give me the 20 likes, hit subscribe, trying to get to 300 subscribers. And I will be putting out a game script tomorrow for the Sunday night game. And on top of that, get me to those 20 likes, and I'll put out a short video with my favorite plays after I have enough time to really go through this slate a little bit more and pick out the guys that I like. And until then, Good luck, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow.